Hello, my name is Patrick Corbett. I'm a journalist and a filmmaker, and this is a short video to support fundraising for a film I intend to do called Killed for a Tweet, the Don Dunphy story. Don Dunphy, 58, was an injured worker and an activist on social media. He lived alone except for his pets in a small house in rural Newfoundland. It was where he'd raised his daughter Megan since she lost her mother at the age of 3. Megan, now 27, moved out after finishing school, but she and her dad remained close. On Easter Sunday, April the 5th, 2015, Megan took her dad out for brunch. It would be the last time she would see him alive.
Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm David Cochran. On Easter Sunday, an RNC officer shot and killed a civilian for the first time in nearly 15 years. Don Dunphy was being investigated for comments he made on Twitter. A police officer assigned to protect the premier visited his home. What happened next led to Don Dunphy's death, has left a family in mourning and a province looking for answers.
The deadly encounter was set in motion 2 days earlier, on Good Friday. Cabinet Minister Sandy Collins tweeted that he was riding with the Premier in his official car and they were listening to The Sun in Your Eyes by Sherman Downey. Don Dunphy rarely missed an opportunity to poke at the politicians with his tweets. He fired back to Collins, "Put on sunglasses and take out the earplugs. You might hear people crying for help." Dunphy sent 5 linked tweets in which he referred to 2 dead politicians who he said looked down on the poor. His final tweet states he would not name these 2 prick-dead MHAs because they might have good family members I may hurt. This was the tweet that was interpreted by the Premier's staff as a threat. A less hysterical interpretation would be that Dunphy was being considerate by not naming these politicians for fear of hurting innocent people's feelings or reputations. And the consensus is, across Twitter, Dunphy's friends, and even the news, that tweet was not in fact a threat. But whatever Dunphy said or meant to say no longer mattered. A decision had been made. According to the official story, a lone armed member of the Premier's security detail visited Don Dunphy on the afternoon after he'd gone for brunch. Don apparently invited him in, but 15 minutes later, he was dead. The very next day, the RCMP reported a version of events that had taken place at the Dunphy home.
To date, the RCMP indicates the investigating officer attended the Dunphy residence, spoke with Mr. Donald Dunphy at the door. The officer was identified as a police officer and was invited into Mr. Dunphy's home by Mr. Dunphy.
He then goes on to report that something changed. Don Dunphy pulled a rifle on the police officer, who in turn shot Dunphy dead. Keep in mind there was only one witness to this event, the officer who shot Don Dunphy.
Since the first days after the shooting, Dunphy's daughter has been calling for an outside investigation into what went wrong. The trigger was pulled by an officer from the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary, the provincial police force the RCMP was brought in to investigate. That wasn't outside enough for the family. They say the 2 police forces have too many ties.
There's a closeness between the forces here. It's critical for an outside force to come in and ensure that this is done right.
And is it being done right? We don't know. After 6 months, the calls for an outside investigation have been ignored. No information has been released to the public, not even the name of the man who shot Don Dunphy. On April the 10th, the same day as Don Dunphy's funeral, an email was leaked to the press. It was reportedly from the officer who shot Don Dunphy. It was short on detail but long on opinion. People like Don Dunphy on social media are an uninformed mob. The shooting was not an egregious act, but a terrible misfortune. We can't really expect people to get the important work of the police. The officer concludes by saying, I cannot regret my actions. And finally, the point of it all. He wishes he could have intervened earlier in Dunphy's life, meaning this was a man whose mental state was so unbalanced that he required intervention. But where is the evidence for that? You can't find it on Twitter, where his literally thousands of tweets express his viewpoints sharply but reasonably. For example, here he applauds U.S. presidential candidate Bernie Sanders. Nor can you find it among his many friends, like the people who gave thousands of dollars at a benefit concert put on by a friend of Meghan's, or the dozens who turned out at a candlelight vigil after Don's death.
Whatever, I have never seen anything out of Don Dunphy but the utmost respect for women, for children, for animals. There's nothing I can say any different than that.
It's very hard to accept a death like this that in many respects seems to be, quite frankly from where I sit, unnecessary.
Megan Dunphy knew Don Dunphy the best. He was the dad who raised her as a single father after her mother died when she was 3. Despite a crippling workplace injury that left him unable to work, Don provided the support his daughter needed to succeed. And when she could support herself as an adult, Megan was there for her dad, just as he had been for her. Megan does not believe her father was culpable in his own death. She doubts he threatened a police officer with a rifle. A good name was about all Don Dunphy had left when he was killed. He was living on only a few $100s a month, and his house was falling down around him through lack of repairs that he could not afford. But Don valued his independence, and despite his circumstances, he had plans for repairing his house, but he had no plans to give up. Now Megan waits for the RCMP to finish their investigation, wondering if her father will get the justice he deserves, or will she have to continue the fight for his good name. It's hard to have confidence in a process with so many missteps and troubling questions. How was Dunphy's tweet so erroneously construed? Why did the officer visit Dunphy alone and on a holiday? There have been missteps from the very beginning. Premier Paul Davis told a press conference that he called the officer the night of the shooting to offer his support, a prejudicial statement from the highest elected official in the province. And in a larger context, there's something even more troubling, and that is the paramilitarization of the police. In a time when, like the rest of Canada, Newfoundland's crime rate is dropping, why are the police becoming more aggressive? This promotional video for the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary seems more appropriate to Northern Ireland in the time of the Troubles than to a mostly rural Newfoundland. And not just in Newfoundland or Canada, but around the world, we're seeing the rise of the security state that seems more of a threat to its citizens than protection. Don Dunphy wasn't just a random individual tragically but mistakenly killed for a tweet. He was killed by forces in our society that confront us all. On his Twitter profile, he called himself a crucified injured worker, a description that became sadly prophetic. I want to do this film for Don Dunphy, a working class hero who fought for his rights and the rights of other workers who did not get their just rewards from a system that treats workers, especially injured workers, as disposable commodities. And now, when workers, environmentalists, Indigenous people, anyone dispossessed by the machine dares to speak out, to protest, government's first response is to surveil and harass them, not to address their concerns. Don Dunphy's story needs to be told, not just because he was a good man who deserves his reputation, even in death, but because Megan Dunphy, his family, friends, and we as Canadians urgently need answers to how and why he was killed. The government won't tell us, so we need to go find out for ourselves. That is the purpose of this film.
It broke our hearts to lose you. You did not go alone. For part of us went with you. Today, God called you home.
You can support this project by going to DonDunphyStory.com, go to fund.